The Italian Wine Podcast is the community-driven platform for Italian wine geeks around the world. Support the show by donating at ItalianWinepodcast.com. Donate €5 or more and we'll send you a copy of our latest book, My Italian Grape Geek Journal, absolutely free. To get your free copy of My Italian Grape Geek Journal, click Support Us at ItalianWinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods. Grazie mille.
Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast Book Club. Each month we select a great wine book to share. We chat to the author and get your opinions. Stay tuned as we read Between the Vines with the Italian Wine Podcast. Hello and welcome to Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. This is the third episode of a new show focusing on the world of wine writing. Each month we choose a book, chat to the author, listen to some extracts and explore the story behind the book. We'd really like your ideas and suggestions too. So, if there's a wine book or a wine writer that you'd like us to feature, please let us know. Today's book is Sicily, the cookbook by Melissa Muller. And I'm thrilled that Melissa is joining us today from Sicily. Hi, Melissa. How are you?
Hello, Richard. I'm well. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, Melissa. Thank you for joining us. I know it's a particularly busy time for you at the moment with various wine fairs and events and tastings, so your time is greatly appreciated.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm happy to take some time out of my day to talk about Sicily and talk about my book and my story.
Perfect. So Melissa studied anthropology at Columbia University in New York City, where she also obtained a master's degree in journalism. Your father, Melissa, was a Wall Street lawyer, and I think I'm correct in saying that you were expected to follow in his footsteps.
Exactly.
But of course, you had other plans inspired by your maternal grandmother and summer trips to your ancestral home in Sicily. You developed a lifelong passion for the island and in particular its cuisine.
Exactly.
You opened a Sicilian restaurant in New York City and after several years of intense research, wrote the cookbook Sicily Recipes Rooted in Traditions. Today you live with your husband, Fabio Erice, on the family winery, Viedo Montone, where you play a key role in winemaking and cellar activities, and you're particularly involved in the vineyard's organic farm.
Absolutely, yes.
You're currently working on your second book, a work of narrative nonfiction with recipes intertwined that will focus on the uncontaminated rural heart of Sicily.
Yes.
The introduction of your book, Melissa, is entitled Rooted in Sicily. Your grandmother migrated from Sicily to America in 1936 when she was just 13 years old. Could you tell us a bit about the circumstances behind her decision to leave Sicily and start a new life in America at that time? And also, what kind of life awaited her in America?
Well, first of all, the word decision didn't play a role for my grandmother. She was 13 years old when she immigrated, and her father had already been 13 years in America. He left when she was only 6 months old because many of his relatives were there, and there were many opportunities. They were not a poor family. They were landowners on my grandfather's side, but because of the opportunities, it was very common at the time to emigrate and go to America. Many people only went for short periods and then came back, and that was his plan. But he found prosperity there. He found a new life, and he sent over for my grandmother and my great-grandmother. The 13 years passed because in the 30s, when she immigrated, the mass wave of immigration had just completed and the borders were pretty much closed. It wasn't so easy to enter anymore. So before her travel and for her life move from Sicily to New York, she had to obtain American citizenship, which my great-grandfather did on her behalf.
What an adventure. It's almost impossible to imagine what that must have been like for a 13-year-old to leave rural Sicily and begin a new life in New York.
Well, when my grandmother was alive, I spent so much time speaking to her, recording all her stories, which I still have. And I was always asking her, what was it like? What was the feeling of leaving? And the main thing was that America was viewed as, of course, the famous line that the streets were lined with gold. So for her, it was an adventure. It was something beautiful. She had an amazing aesthetic sense. So she was excited for the clothes, for the fashion, for this new, beautiful life as she imagined it. So for her, it wasn't a sad moment to leave. And on top of it, she would be meeting her father for the first time traveling there.
Wow, incredible story. And it's something probably we could spend all day discussing, but you spoke about this wave of migrants and your grandmother came at the tail end of that wave. More than 4 million Italians who emigrated to the United States between 1880 and 1924. Is it possible to quantify the legacy of that mass movement of people from one continent to another, the impact they've had on America, its cuisine, its culture?
Well, of course, America is made up of all these different cultures and all these different ethnic groups that travel there. The Italian American community is extremely strong and has been because of the amounts of Italians that left, especially from southern Italy.
Yeah. So you grew up then as a second, third generation migrant in America. You spent your summers in Sicily.
Mm-hmm.
And can you give us a flavour of what that was like?
Well, on my father's side, so my paternal grandparents were German.
Right.
My maternal grandparents Italian, specifically, as we just spoke about my Sicilian grandmother. So already within the household, there were two major different cultures, of course, at play. My father, as you mentioned, practiced international tax law, and he had various offices around the world where he would practice his work from, not only New York. So at a young age, I started traveling. At 6 months old, he took me on his first trip.
Wow.
At 2 years old, it was my first trip to Asia. He would take me often to. I'm an only child, so he would take my mother and I along with him to give me this exposure to the world. As I grew up, I also studied abroad a lot. I studied Japanese, so I studied in Japan, lived there for 6 months, and visited did smaller study abroads within Europe as well, in Northern Europe. With that said, my pull and my love and the passion were all about Sicily, where I spent every childhood summer. It was 1980, and I was 2 years old, and my mother had never been to my grandmother's village in Sicily. In fact, she actually wasn't so keen on visiting. She assumed that Sicily would be a rural version of the New York City Sicilian neighborhood that she grew up in. I was 2 years old. We took this first trip, and my mother was fascinated by what she found in Sicily, and the beauty that her mother and grandmother had described to her was nothing compared to what she actually found on the island. And she fell in love with the small village where grandma was from.
Right.
As a child, for me, it was like a playground, because this small village that is one of Sicily's smallest. It's the name of the town is Sant'Anna, and it's a fraction of a larger town called Caltabellotta, which is in the province of Agrigento on the southern part of the island. My summers there were moments where I felt that I had freedom, where I had true relationships with my friends and with my relatives in the towns, where I felt that I could be myself and express myself on all levels, but with simple, sincere relationships. I felt that back home in New York and later, which became New Jersey, I didn't have that kind of freedom as a child. That was really the sense that I felt. When summers came to an end, I felt like I was like a tree that was being uprooted from the land. They were devastating moments for me. And despite all that international travel as a child, I was always pulled back to Sicily. Anything else went secondary. If anything else couldn't live up to what Sicily was.
That's perfectly clear from reading your book. That passion, your affinity with Sicily just comes through every page. Also, I'm really interested in what you said about the sense of freedom you had as a child and the relationships you had with your extended family, because last month we discussed with Robert Camuto, who had a similar background to yours, and he expressed exactly the same sense of freedom and discovery and richness.
Yes.
So yeah, really very interesting to hear that from you as well.
For example, one of my favorite daily activities in the summer was not going to the beach, which was only 10 minutes away, but was going into the countryside where there's a sulfur pool of natural sulfur water that It was very small, but all of my cousins and I would play in this little gebbia, it's called in Sicilian, and then run around the country and make barbecued meats and stay until the stars came out. They're just simple activities, but that provide so much richness and culture.
Yeah.
And that's where my love of cooking started, really, because at a young age, I started cooking there. But then when I would return back from Sicily and be in our home kitchen, I missed Sicily so much that I felt that the only way to recreate this sense of Sicily was for the home to smell and to have the perfumes and scents of the Sicilian cuisine.
I think this is a good point, Melissa, to do a first reading. Your book is essentially a cookbook, but there are also some wonderful narrative passages that I really, really enjoyed reading. So I'm delighted that you're going to read one of those passages for us just now.
I first cultivated my love for the island in my youth during the summers I spent in my grandmother's village, Sant'Anna, a small mountain town of 500 people. My first visit took place in 1980, just months after my second birthday. Year after year, as soon as summer recess began, my family and I returned to the village. During the school year, I used to count down the days from September until June, longing to arrive in Sicily, feeling as if the land pulled me back, like a gravitational force, absorbing me into its mysterious essence. During these wondrous summers, I felt liberated from the confinements of American city life. I breezed around the village, teaching friends how to do cartwheels and sitting on the steps of the piazza, watching other children kick soccer balls into the walls of the church. The sound of their happiness was radiant. Their embraces were sincere. When the southern Scirocco winds arrived in the town, the sweet scent of jasmine flowers intermingled with those of sugar emanating from the pastry shop and with the scent of bread baking in wood-burning ovens of the panificio. Well-being dwelled inside me, and I felt a sense of belonging. This was the Sicily of my childhood, a place that held the key to my innocent, youthful bliss. When summers came to an end, I used to hide my passport from my parents, dreading our inevitable departure. My heart longed to live year-round in Sicily. When our flight took off from Palermo's airport, I used to stare out the window until I couldn't see even a small trace of the land beneath me. I remember feeling like a tree whose roots were being yanked with force out of the soil. Back in New York, as I grew older, I discovered the key to keeping Sicily alive throughout the year. I began to cook, filling our home with the bold aromas of ingredients such as anchovies, oregano, and eggplants. From the flavors and scents that exuded from the kitchen, my sensory memories were stimulated, and I re-experienced Sicily in a personal way, albeit from 4,000 miles away. But despite my summers in Sant'Anna, I knew little about Sicily as a whole, neither about its history nor about the cultural and culinary nuances that characterize each area of the island. As a young adult, Sicily became my focus of study, first as a culinary student and later at the university. This is when I began to explore the interconnectedness between the past and present and the roots of today's traditional cuisine.
Wonderful. Paint such a vivid picture of those wondrous summers of your childhood. It obviously had a massive impact on you and on your life and on the future direction of your life. In fact, after you studied, you decided to open a Sicilian restaurant in Manhattan. Can you tell us a bit about that experience? What was that like? What are the highs and lows of running a restaurant in New York City?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, my studies were in anthropology at Columbia University. For most of my undergrad time that I spent there, I studied how Sicily was represented in popular culture.
Mm-hmm.
I did a research of all the newspaper articles that mention the word Sicily or Sicilians, starting at the beginning of the mass wave of immigration. I found that almost every time the word Sicily was used, there were other words like dagger, blood, violence, black hand, and words that gave a sense of a culture that was violent. This made my blood boil because I knew Sicily as this sweet, beautiful place. And of course, I didn't feel that there was any sort of tone of violence. Historically, that might not have been the case, but it's not what I felt. And where there is violence, it's not that that's everything. That's a part of history, like in every country. I felt that it was my duty at that point to represent Sicily. And by opening a Sicilian restaurant, I didn't do so as much to have a restaurant, to have a business. That wasn't my objective whatsoever, but it was more to have a laboratory or a place that I could experiment all these different ways to tell stories and ways through the food to tell stories about Sicily. And of course, at the same time, I loved cuisine and I loved cooking. It just felt like a natural evolution for me to have a Sicilian restaurant. I felt that half of my time was in the kitchen and half was speaking to people and telling about Sicily, like a love letter to the island of Sicily.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Melissa, this whole study of how Sicily is portrayed in popular culture and that sometimes negative connotation that we have with Sicily and the mafia. And I guess the Godfather films are as much as anything to blame for that kind of perception.
Well, spaghetti and meatballs comes out of the Godfather film. It's a dish that doesn't exist in Sicily. But if you ask most people in the United States, what's one Sicilian dish, they'll tell you spaghetti and meatballs.
Yeah, there's a very famous scene I remember in the film where Clemenza, I think, is teaching Michael Corleone how to make the spaghetti and meatballs. Yeah,
Exactly. Artistically, they're such beautiful films. What bothered me was how they represented, how they portrayed Sicily, and only expanded on the negative connotation that had so strongly been developed at the end of the 1800s.
Yeah, very interesting. To probe a little bit more into your life as a restaurant owner, who were your clientele at that time? Would they have been Italians or Sicilians, or were you catering to everyone really?
Well, I had three Sicilian restaurants. The first was on Bleecker Street, and that I opened 1 month after the Twin Towers fell. I was 22 years old. That was
Wow.
that was a mixed clientele. The second restaurant, and I think most important in terms of representing Sicily, was called Eolo, and that was on 7th Avenue in Chelsea. And the location is a very neighborhood area. So I was very much catering to the neighborhood clientele. However, on the weekends, that same neighborhood clientele would normally go and eat in other areas of Manhattan. And that's where the Sicilian American community from the tri-state area would be the clientele of who would be coming in to eat and experiencing these flavors of Sicily. So half the week was one type of customer. But what was important for me was always to keep Sicily as the main representation. Throughout the week, it was more in terms of the food. And then the weekends, it ended up being more storytelling and more doing special events where there were holidays in Sicily that I would recreate the events at the restaurant.
Would you be providing an authentic taste of Sicily, or did you find yourself having to compromise and offer spaghetti and meatballs simply just to meet that demand?
No. At the beginning, it wasn't easy because people would come in and say, I thought that Sicilian food is spaghetti and meatballs, or the so-called red sauce joint. And I would say, I'm sorry, but I have pasta with sea urchin, I have pasta with sardines and so forth. And at the beginning, it was challenging, also because my wine list at Eolo was exclusively Sicilian.
Right.
And when I first opened the restaurant, I found that people would come in, sit down, and get up to go to the nearby liquor store to purchase a bottle of Chianti or Barolo or a different wine and come back with that bottle. Over time, of course, the exclusive Sicilian wine list became something that was highly regarded, and Wine Spectator focused on it. And I had a clientele that came sometimes not even for the food, but to experience the Sicilian wines.
Sounds wonderful. So you created these patches of Sicily in New York City, but that obviously wasn't enough to satisfy your incredible yearning for the Sicilian way of life. When did you decide to move to Sicily, and what was it like moving from New York City to this remote farm in rural Sicily?
I didn't ever think that my life would make such a major change. I was extremely rooted in my life with the restaurants and at the university. I, at this point, was a journalism student at Columbia University doing my master's degree while I had restaurant number 2 and 3. So, of course, my days were very full and I was extremely integrated in this life. What happened actually was I was writing the book, Sicily, and every 2 months I would travel to Sicily in order to do research. I needed to visit all of the island. And so for a few years, I kept going on these, what I called research trips. Also, as such a hard worker and sometimes a little bit too much of a harsh on myself. I didn't allow myself vacations. So these trips to Sicily were not vacations, but it was my way of being able to go to Sicily, because I would make an excuse to myself that I wasn't just vacationing, I was actually working. So the first few years, I visited many, many wineries throughout the island, because I would have the wines at the restaurant. I would ask the importer if I could set up an appointment. And then through these visits, I would ask for connections to local cheesemakers, honey makers, and so forth. It was a way of creating my network on the island. As the research was going on, I was not familiar with Feodo Montoni. But one Friday night in my restaurant Eolo, Bill Nesto and his wife Frances Di Sivino reserved a table of 8. Bill Nesto is a master of wine, and the couple are authors to The World of Sicilian Wine, published by the University of California Press. And they were presenting their book that was about to come out, and they brought in with them a few different wines that they thought that they would have their guests taste, one of which was Rucara from Feodo Montoni. And they insisted that I sit down with them and taste this wine, which they said represented one of the most purest versions of Nero d'Avola in Sicily. Of course, a busy Friday night, the last thing that I could think about doing, I was overbooked even, and I sat down pretty much reluctantly, because it wasn't easy to do so. And they poured me this glass of Rucara, and the room that was so noisy suddenly came to a stop. And I felt like I was immersing myself into this glass of Nero d'Avola, just imagining this land that they started describing to me. And I started traveling with my mind. I spoke to the importer of Feodo Montoni wines, and I asked if I could set up a visit to meet the Filici family and to learn about the land of Montoni. And that visit was rejected. I didn't know it was rejected. I was only told that the family wasn't available. So I asked to visit again, and that second request was rejected, the third time and the fourth time. And finally, I said to the importer, will it ever be possible to visit the land of Feodo Montoni? My research for the book is coming to an end, and it would really be a pleasure for me. And at that point, the importer spoke to Fabio, who's now my husband, and told him, this person now has all of your wines that they're on her restaurant. It's a business meeting. You have to accept this person who's coming. And he said, okay. Reluctantly, I was accepted, and arrived one day at Montoni with my mother, who accompanied me on all my trips, research trips. And from there, the first thing I felt when I arrived at Montoni was I had finally felt the truth of Sicily, of old Sicily, because it's an area that's so isolated, and modern society is so far. And the estate itself is like a hermitage. And I felt like I had taken a trip back in time, not only into the center of Sicily. So Fabio and I stayed in touch, and over a 2-year period, we spoke for the recipe that I added to my book, and our friendship grew over the phone, and then that friendship over time unraveled into what it became. And not only did I find true love in Fabio, but I found that I wanted to be on the land of Montoni and spend more time there. And slowly, I started coming back, not for research, but coming to Sicily more often. And after about a year of going back very, very often, every month, back and forth, is when I realized that it was time for me to leave New York behind and to make my life at Montoni. And so I did. I found my paradise here. And that's there's just no way that I could go back.
What an incredible story. It just shows you that persistence pays off.
Well, glad I insisted. But it wasn't up to me. It was I believe that this was true destiny, because we started a family. We have 2 young boys. Life has bloomed into something that I never thought would ever be possible.
Wow. That passion and that love for the land and its people is something that really comes through in this cookbook, which goes beyond the recipes, and it explores the history and the culture of the island. And it's really the most beautiful, lavish production with stunning pictures and full of photos as well, black and white family photos that really give it an air of a family scrapbook, I suppose. Can you talk to us a bit then about the design and layout of the book? But also, more importantly, I think, what is it about Sicily that makes it so interesting and so rich from a culinary point of view?
Well, in terms of the layout of the book, Rizzoli is the publisher, and their books are always very stunning and beautiful. The photographer, Sarah Remington, traveled with me twice. She came to Sicily, and then we have thousands more photographs that didn't end up in the book. In terms of Sicily and what makes it such an interesting culinary, from a culinary perspective, there's so much there. I'm often asked, what is Sicilian cuisine? And after all these years of research, it's a very difficult question to answer
Yeah.
because it's so multi layered. We start with the idea that there's multi layers of history. It's a land that was conquered by different ethnic groups over the centuries, and each one brought with them different ingredients, different techniques, irrigation techniques, farming techniques, and cooking techniques with them. So it's very opulent in that sense because it's representing so many different cultures from the world. At the same time, there's the difference that is created by social class because there's the cuisine that stems out of the cucina povera, but there's also the cuisine that comes from the aristocratic families of the island. And often the dishes that represent the cucina povera are reflections of those aristocratic dishes, using ingredients that were easily found. It's a cuisine that's very almost a joking cuisine, very lively, very full of the personality of the Sicilian, full of flavors that go from sweet to sour, agrodolce. These are contrasts that you can feel in the Sicilian culture, but also in the Sicilian cuisine. And authenticity is pretty much everywhere, but it's nowhere because in all dishes, everyone says that their version is what's the authentic version. But pretty much, and I mentioned this in the book, the authentic version is the version that everyone makes themselves. And the time of year, the holidays, the ingredients that are available, the seasonality. With all this said, there's so much at play that makes up what Sicilian cuisine is.
Yeah. In fact, you describe Sicily as this earthly paradise, and we'll talk about some of the specific recipes in a moment. What about the challenges or the difficulties that you face, considering that you made this massive transition from America to Sicily? Is there anything about Sicilian life that annoys you, or is there something from New York that you missed, like a hot dog or something like that you can't get your hands on in rural Sicily?
Well, initially, what was difficult for me was to be away from my parents, and they would come often. The separation, especially from my father, who was really my best friend, was extremely difficult for me.
Mm.
And every Sunday on the farm, I would make videos for him and send them back to him so he could understand this beautiful life that I was experiencing on the farm. In fact, just as a side note, he would always joke that his favorite color was green. Of course, being in the financial world, and I would send him the grain fields of the grain that we were growing and just rich emerald green colors, and say, "No, this is my green."
Yeah.
And he passed away, and I had only been 3 years in Sicily. But he loved Montoni so much. And what was important for me is how much he loved Fabio and said that this is the man for you. When he first met him, he said, if you don't marry this man, I will. So that gave me peace. He was initially a bit upset that, however, that I would leave behind all this, what I had created in New York, especially because the restaurants were very successful. My university work was going in a direction that was very positive, and he was a little bit concerned that maybe after all the sacrifices that I had put in, that I was leaving that behind. But soon before he passed away, he told me, I realize now that you're ahead of the game. And I didn't understand what he meant by that, but just over now the years of reflecting, was he
Yeah.
realized that I followed my passion, I followed my heart, and I really did. I did it.
Mm.
I changed continents for
Yeah.
love on all levels, love of the man that became my husband first and foremost, but love of Sicily. Because it was one thing to represent Sicily from the other side of the world and have a corner of Sicily in New York City, but it's another thing to actually live on the island. Now, when you say what was the transition like, of course, it wasn't so easy at the beginning because I thought that I was Sicilian. But I arrived, and of course, everyone is calling me L'Americana, putting into question everything I said. I would say that I wanted to grow the vegetable garden, and all the farm workers at Montoni would sort of laugh and say, "Oh, she doesn't know what it means to have a garden." We'll see how that goes along. But over time, I gained a name for myself. In Sicilian, there's three categories of people: fasciatori, sfasciatori, and godatori,
Yeah.
which translate to people who are doers, people who undo, and people who enjoy what others have done. Became known as someone who does things. If I planted a garden, I would follow it through. And even if it produced too much, I would find a way to make preserves and find a way to transform this food into something. But the first few years were challenging. And of course, being in a winemaking family where we have very unique exposure from our friends, go from the local shepherd, cheesemaker, but to the heads of government, to the anti-mafia judge. So around our table are always conversations about Sicily, but in completely different levels, intellectual levels, social levels. And slowly, over the decade that I've lived here, I've become Sicilian.
I know from my own experience of the challenges of moving from one place to another, in my case, from Scotland to Verona. It can take years to adapt and years to find your own sense of community and belonging. But the rewards, as I think you've illustrated, are fantastic once you overcome the hurdles and the challenges involved.
Are you enjoying this podcast? There is so much more high-quality wine content available from Mama Jumbo Shrimp. Check out our new wine study maps or books on Italian wine, including Italian Wine Unplugged and much, much more. Just visit our website, mamajumboshrimp.com. Now, back to the show.
Let's take you back to your place of origin then with your second reading.
My ancestral village, Sant'Anna of Caltavellotta. My grandmother Francesca was born in a small village, Sant'Anna, which is part of the municipality of a larger town, Caltavellotta, situated on the southwestern corner of the island. Sant'Anna was founded in 1622. The mountainous rural territory where it is nestled has traces back to prehistoric times. A natural spring fountain, known as the Bevatoio, situated in front of a monastery, Santa Maria di Montevergine, was the only source of water in the village when my grandmother was a child. The spout carried from a mountaintop spring an endless stream of water, rich in sulfur, for the townspeople to use for drinking, cooking, and for bathing. A round receptacle in front of the fountain was also filled for animals. Francesca relished the taste of the water. Every time she passed the fountain, she would tilt her little head to the left and take a drink of its mineral-rich water. On the day she immigrated to America in January of 1936, with her relatives and townspeople at her side, Francesca and her mother walked down the cobblestone roads of Sant'Anna and stopped to sip the sweet water one last time. As their journey unfolded, they passed their cousin the shepherd with his flock of sheep, and then Mountain Necropoli, built thousands of years ago by the area's indigenous Sicans. Soon they came across Francesca's grandfather's farmland, which was filled with endless rows of olive trees and thin green grass sprouting from the limestone earth. This farm area was located in Contrada Troccoli, which takes its name from the famed Greek settlement Triopola, which in turn had been built on the ruins of a Sicanian stronghold from the Bronze Age. The trio in Triopola refers to the spot's three gifts of nature: its high-peaked cliff, providing the perfect defense for a fortress, the abundance of spring water, and its fertile lands. The Greeks used the land as a major urban and rural center, producing olive oil and honey, as well as making wine in underground amphora. During the First Punic War, the town was destroyed by the Romans, but its inhabitants refounded Triopolis in the area that is now Contrada Troccoli. When ancient Triopolis finally fell to the Romans in 99 BC, it embarked on a long history that transformed the land into a cultural crossroads.
Fantastic. Really enjoyed that. And again, a really vivid picture of this place where your family originated.
The name Caltavellotta comes from the Arabic word Khalat al-Balad, which means fortress among the oak trees, because the top point of Caltavellotta is a old Arabic fortress.
Right.
All of this, of course, my grandmother didn't know as she grew up, all this history.
Yeah.
But one thing was interesting was that shortly before she passed away, Seems like in my family, shortly before people pass away, they reveal important family details. But my grandmother said to me that as much as she found prosperity in America, she became a designer. She made dresses for Jacqueline Kennedy in the 60s. She was very enterprising, started her own business of fashion business. And with all that, though, she missed Sicily so much and it stayed inside her. And she said, if I knew that the water in America wasn't as sweet as the water in the town of the fountain, which, mind you, is smells not even so sweet. The sulfur water smells like rotten eggs. But she said, if I knew that the water wasn't so sweet, that day in January of 1936, I would have drowned myself in the fountain of Sant'Anna and never left.
And did she maintain connections in the village? Did she return frequently, or did she have family who stayed there?
Yeah, she 40 years went by before she returned.
Wow.
And that was difficult for her. But then she did travel back almost every year. Every summer she would come with us as well. And she always had very strong connections to all of her first cousins, connections that we, of course, still have today, my mother and I.
Okay, so you spoke already, Melissa, about meeting your future husband and joining forces with him on the family winery. Can you tell us a little bit more then about this winery, where it's located, what your signature wine is? You mentioned this red wine, the Nero d'Avola, which captured your heart. What could you tell us if you had to choose just one wine? What would that be?
Well, the first part of your question would be, where is Montoni located? It's in the center of the island, in the heart of the island, in the mountains. It's between Monte Cammarata and the Madonia mountain range. And specifically, Montoni is at 800 meters above sea level, or on a slope that ranges from 500 to 800 meters above sea level. At the base of the slope is a large valley that runs from north to south. So the winds are always extremely strong on the land of Montoni. It's a microclimate that doesn't feel like many other parts of Sicily because the heat in the summer is not too intense. It's quite tolerable. In the evenings, it gets quite chilly, actually, which is great for winemaking. The winery is one of Sicily's oldest documented historical wineries. The cellars that are in the structure known as the Balio were erected in 1469. The history of the Filici family became intertwined with Feo de Montoni when Fabio's grandfather purchased the estate at the end of the 1800s. He purchased it as much as there was winemaking. He was more interested in the grain fields. Winemaking continued on the estate. Fabio's father continued making wine, but on a small level. He sold most of the grapes to other wineries, and only a small amount of the wine was vinified and bottled. Fabio, his background is in mechanical engineering, but he fell in love at a young age with Montoni and really created everything that is the realm of Montoni today. Big problem in this part of Sicily is that farmers tend to spend more time thinking about which new tractor they're buying and not on developing a brand. And Fabio was really a visionary in that sense. He strongly developed what Feo de Montoni is and realized that the importance of the land at Montoni shouldn't be less than other important lands around the world. And he felt that it was his duty to represent that. One of the main things is just by transforming the product and transforming the agricultural product into wine. So today, Feo de Montoni is considered one of Italy's top wineries, but that all comes from Fabio's merit and all of the effort that he put in. And of course, because of the unique microclimate and the land. So the grapes are always very healthy, of good quality, and they produce a wine in the fields more than in the cellar. My role at the winery has become interesting because I work alongside my husband. I do so in respect for the history of Montoni and for Fabio's sacrifices in developing his love project. I do so also really for the future of our family. I feel it's my duty to be a part of the winery. I love winemaking. I love being Fabio's assistant in winemaking. I work on the farming end because we're inorganic. So we have 150 hectares that 44 have vineyard on them. That means that all the rest is grain fields, legumes, olive groves, and so forth. A lot of my time is spent focusing on the other products, not just on the wine. Sustainability is very, very important to us. And this word biodiversity that is used very so often, something that needs to be focused on and should be focused on, because it creates natural habitats for animals that otherwise wouldn't perhaps live on the land. And it's very easy to be in organic farming when you have so much biodiversity.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be a discussion that we could go in on another time, because it's really a world on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to press you on this question. If I could have one glass or just one bottle, perhaps, from your winery, what would it be, and what would you serve with it?
Well, all of the wines at Montoni are produced from indigenous Sicilian grapes. Caterato, Grillo, Inzolia, Nerello Mascalese, Nero d'Avola, which is known as Calabrese, not Nero d'Avola, and Pericone. If I had to choose one, let's go back perhaps to that Vrucara, which I tasted back in my restaurant. The Vrucara is made from Trifaloxida grapes.
Yeah.
That were on the land when Fabio's grandfather purchased the property. All other Nero d'Avola that grows on the farm were grafted from these mother plants.
What would you pair with that, Melissa? What would you pair with the Nero d'Avola?
Well, here I like game or lamb, goat. At the same time, it also could be paired. It's a little bit of a stretch, but I chill it a little bit and serve it with tuna or with a mackerel, a fish that is very strong in flavor, if I chill it a little bit.
Sounds wonderful. It must be approaching lunchtime, because I'm beginning to get these hunger pangs just thinking about that wonderful food and wine. Let's continue then with the discussion on food and cuisine and Sicilian cuisine, and take a look at a couple of the recipes from your book. I thought it would be interesting to take a primo, a secondo, and a dolce, a dessert. So in the interest of my waistline, we'll skip the antipasti, also because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But if we can look first at the primo, and the primo we've selected is the pasta con le sarde. Could you tell us a bit about that dish, about its history and significance, and then perhaps what wine you might pair with it?
Sure. Well, if we speak about history of this dish, I feel like I'll be telling you legends of folklore, because really there is no written trace of where this dish comes from. It supposedly was introduced by the cook to an Arab general who was conquering the island in the 800s after Christ. There was nothing to eat, so there was an abundance of sardines. There was an abundance of wild fennel growing in the hills, and he threw in some spices like saffron that were part of his repertoire and created this dish. But where everything falls for me with that folkloristic version is that pasta didn't exist yet. So how could he have been making pasta with sardines? I really cannot say the exact history. What I can say is that this dish is very significant of a dish that creates mare e monte, the sea and the land, into one dish. For me, really, what's more important is that it's a dish that takes poor ingredients, inexpensive ingredients, ingredients that are available in abundance. In the spring, sardines, there's more than one could possibly catch in their net from the sea. The wild fennel starts to grow in February, and at this point in March, April, it's extremely tender. I feel like it's an example of what Sicily is, of taking what's available. In Palermo, often this dish is called pasta con immondizia, which means pasta with garbage. And that makes me feel upset, because I don't feel that it's a dish that's putting garbage. It's a dish that's putting these amazing ingredients that on their own are beautiful, but then it becomes such an interesting combination of flavors.
Yeah. What would you pair with that, Melissa?
We produce a Nerello Mascalese. Do I have to pair with Vale de Montoni? Because at home...
Absolutely, whatever you can get your hands on.
Of course, I'm happy to do so. We produce a Nerello Mascalese rosso that is aged only in cement, so it's very linear. It doesn't see any wood. It's very fresh. So I serve that chilled when we just had this dish last week, because it's typical of this time. It's typical for St. Joseph's Day, which is the 19th of March.
Wonderful.
But I should say that at home, we love tasting wines from abroad. So
that's admirable. I know of some producers. In fact, again, we had a similar conversation with Robert last month, and he mentioned one producer he would only ever really drink his own produce. And when your produce is so good, who can blame you? But yeah, I appreciate what you say about broadening your horizons and also learning from what's going on elsewhere in the world.
No, because we visit so many wine fairs and also visit wineries, but at the fairs, there's really no moment to go around and start tasting other people's wines.
Yeah.
So the only way to do so is at our home table. Some of the wines recently we've been really inspired by as well, because it creates more challenge. It makes you look forward to the harvest and say, I can't wait to try something new and do a different temperature of vinification or add the stems at a different percentage inside the tank and so forth.
Yeah.
Inspiration from others' artistic creations.
Okay, I think we're ready for our second plate, our secondo. And for this one, we've selected Mama Adele's braised goat. This is a dish that has a particular significance for your husband's family. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. Well, this is a dish that in our family is made every holidays. The reason is that there's a beautiful culture in rural Sicily. Is that amongst farming neighbors, it's very common to share products at a holiday. So the local shepherd will bring his goat or his lamb. We will give wine, and there's these beautiful exchanges. The cheesemakers brings us the ricotta and so forth. So our holiday meals are always extremely complete with all the different flavors of our territory. The capretto is something that never misses, also because these animals often graze off our land. And all the ingredients in the dish are also ingredients that come from Montoni. The rosemary, the bay leaf, the tomato, the olive oil, the wine, and the salt. No, sorry. The salt is not there. The importance in our home is also that for my husband, every Christmas and Easter, as he grew up, he would wake up to the smell and to the perfumes of this goat cooking of my mother-in-law's recipe. And she's now 94. Her and I always cook this dish every holiday together, and it just becomes a celebration of family in all senses.
Sounds wonderful, and also to have a dish that has that resonance, that significance for your family. It's really wonderful to hear.
I'd like to add that every time we make this dish, it is different.
Yeah.
One of the reasons is the animal itself. What is it grazing upon? Just this Easter, we received 2 different goats, and I cooked one on Easter and one on Easter Monday.
Right.
And it was really interesting how they were 2 totally, completely different dishes.
Yeah, incredible. And what would you pair with that, Melissa?
Well, we have to go back to the pre-phylloxera ricotta at this point, because on a holiday celebration, that's what we put on the table.
Let's move on to dessert. We can only really talk about cannoli, although I suppose there are other desserts available. Can you tell us something about this dish? It's an icon, I suppose, of Sicily. Where can we find it? Do you make your own, or is there a pastry shop that you prefer? And what would you pair with this one?
Okay, well, here the history is a little bit clearer, just because of the etymology of the word cannolo. The word comes from canna in Latin, which means cane or reed, because the dough itself was wrapped around a bamboo reed before it was fried. Of course, today everyone uses metal tubes to put the dough around, but historically it was the bamboo reed. The cannolo is typically filled with ricotta, and ricotta is a byproduct of the cheese making. It's not cheese itself. And ricotta is an element that's made fresh by cheesemakers, especially in the rural parts of the island. There's grain and there's pasture. So ricotta is something that's always available. Of course, in the summer months, the ricotta doesn't have the same flavor. So cannoli is very popular at this time of year, because with the green fields, the spring fields, the animals graze upon the flowers and the different flavors. And the ricotta has a very unique flavor profile. And just ricotta alone with pasta is beautiful. But the cannoli, when I have guests, I always fry up some cannoli.
Wow.
Use a little red wine in the dough, which gives it its color, and just a touch of, if it's good ricotta, it only needs some powdered sugar and nothing else. No chocolate chips, no candied fruit, just a touch of the powdered sugar. And you asked where the best places on the island. Well, this is a good question, because there's many different interpretations, additions as well to the ricotta. In the area around Montoni, there's a restaurant in Cammarata called Filici, which he has his own animals, so he makes a beautiful ricotta and cannolo. But then there's some just standout pastry shops in Palermo, like Pasticceria Cappello. In Erice, there's Maria Grammatico's famous pastry shop. In Dattilo, which is in the province of Trapani as well, there's the Bar Dattilo. Some say those are the best cannoli on the island. In Piana degli Albanesi, there's Extra Bar that makes these extra large versions of cannolo.
Wonderful. We'll add those recommendations to the show notes because I'm sure some of our listeners will be lucky enough to visit Sicily at some point, and those sound like fantastic recommendations. I was also really struck by what you said about that seasonal flavour profile of ricotta that changes according to the season. Not something that I was aware of, but I can understand completely how that would alter the flavour.
Historically, you wouldn't find cannolo in the summer. Now, of course, made even for tourists who come, but historically, any dish with ricotta wasn't prepared. It's a spring ingredient.
Interesting. We could talk all day, I think, about Sicilian food, but I'm conscious that you've already been incredibly generous with your time. So I want to change topics slightly and talk instead now about the craft of being a writer. You've given us some hint of the research that was involved, the visits to the island that you undertook when you were writing the book. And I know you're also now writing your second book. Can you tell us a little bit about the craft of being a writer? Where do you write? When do you write? How do you find time to write, Melissa, with your family, with your husband, with the farm, with the wine, with the trade fairs? How on earth do you find time to write?
It's a good question. Sometimes I ask myself that question. But I'm a good multitasker. I remember when I was doing my master's degree at Columbia University Journalism, and Professor Sam Friedman didn't believe that I had a restaurant. He had to come and see with his own eyes because he said it couldn't be possible that someone who does all this so much homework and is the first one to turn in everything, and at 3 a.m, your email would arrive with the homework, and yet you were running a restaurant and then a second one. But I'm inspired by life. My father taught this to me. Was his words were, "I'll retire when I die." He was up every morning at 5 a.m. I want to live life to its fullest. So that's the first thing about how I get writing done. Because first and foremost, I'm a mother and a wife. So a mother to 2 young boys who are growing and need me present. And that's my joy of life. Then I'm a part farmer. I'm part sales director of the winery, the part assistant winemaker. All of these things put together, of course, leave little time for writing, but it's those moments of quiet that I put aside for myself. Every day I dedicate 1 hour in the office to stopping everything, to closing the door and writing. And sometimes people say, well, how do you just start writing right away? Because I just start writing. I put down anything, even if it looks stupid, but then somehow it just turns into something. Of course, it needs to be edited later, but at least it's getting down what's in my head. Sometimes I actually write by taking out my microphone and just dictate onto the phone and then transcribe that onto paper. And often I write at nighttime after putting my boys to sleep, even 2 hours, but between 9 at night and 11 at night from my home laptop, I'm able to get a lot done in the silence of our home.
Okay, good. I hesitate to ask, but do you find time amongst all that to read for pleasure? And if so, what are you reading?
Well, in all honesty, most of what I'm reading right now is for, let's call it research. There's one book I have on my nightstand right now, which is not in English, but it was written by our priest and spiritual father. It's a book called Sudite sia la pace, and it was written by Father Marco Lupo. And it's not a religious book. It's a book about finding the inner peace and about finding that mind-body connection of quietness. And that's the one book. It's been now a few months. I'm not gonna lie, a few months on my nightstand, but I often read a few pages before going to sleep.
Okay. And what about your own book that you're working on at the moment? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? When can we expect to see that in bookstores?
Well, this book is it's almost hard to find the category, in the sense that it's part memoir, because it talks about someone who left city life to move to the farm, what the farm means to me, what the nature means to me, and how it reflects our own who we are on the land and the lessons that are learned from the farm. It's about becoming Sicilian, a little bit about what I mentioned earlier. And it's about someone who in the morning puts on her farm boots and in the evening has to put on her string of pearls. And the morning has her hands in the mud, and in the evening is at a gala dinner at the Four Seasons in either Tokyo, Rome, or Palermo. So it's a very interesting life that I try to explain through the memoir part. It's also part. It's part a book that gives background into Sicilian culture in general. So because, as I mentioned earlier, around our table are all different walks and lives of Sicilians and of those who are intertwined with Sicily, from heads of government, anti-mafia judges, local cheesemakers, marsala makers, winemakers, people who, botanists. There's a dear friend, Sicilian botanist, who explains how Sicilian history can all be seen through what grows on the flora and the fauna of the land. And it's exciting of how I've learned about Sicily through all these different encounters. And then, of course, it's part cookbook, because the recipes and the traditions could never be far from what I do. I've become Sicilian in my own right so much by through learning about Sicilian food and how that reflects the culture.
I'm really looking forward to seeing that when it's published. It sounds that it's going to be another wonderful book.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I know you've been busy in this period. We're recording this episode of the podcast just on the eve of Vinitaly. So I know this is a really busy period for you with wine fairs. Are you coming to Vinitaly?
Absolutely. Every year we're present in the Sicily Pavilion. It's a very important fair for us. We sell our wines in 27 countries around the world, and most of these international partners come in. If they don't come to Montoni once a year, which many of them do, at least they come and have a visit at Vinitaly.
I'll come and say hello as well at some point in the show.
Oh, good.
Finally, Melissa, where can listeners get a copy of your book?
Well, in the US, in England, Australia, and local bookstores, of course, on Amazon, the books are available as well all throughout the world.
Fantastic. Melissa, thank you so much for being my guest today on Book Club. It's been a really interesting and inspiring conversation. I think one that I could continue for a number of hours to come, but I'm conscious of time. It's nearly lunchtime. I'm beginning to feel hungry myself.
So do I.
I hope to meet you in person at Vinitaly. And thanks again for being my guest today on Book Club. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on the Italian Wine Podcast. Next month, our guest will be David Way, and we'll be discussing with him his book, The Wines of Piemonte. David is a WSET educator. He's a Master of Wine candidate, and he's got some really interesting things to say, not just about wines from Piemonte, but wines from Italy and across the world more generally. So thank you for your company today. Until next time.
Thanks for joining the Italian Wine Podcast Book Club. Tune in again next month when we'll get between the vines with another great wine book. Remember, our show notes, including full details of all the books we've discussed today, are available at italianwinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods.